Shame is one of the most powerful and unrecognised driving forces in our society, and this is especially true where sex is concerned. Maybe we aren't as well educated as we think we are. I've recently been talking to people about so many shame topics, from porn addiction to anti-abortionism, feminism to domestic violence, and the illegal slave trade industry to the virtually unrecognised life of happy, healthy, legal escort workers, and from Tantra to BDSM and beyond. And each subject is a minefield of triggers for confusion and anger, and points that will really be argued on into eternity. The heat of debate is rife, and everyone has an opinion. Almost everyone stubbornly and aggressively clings to their points of view, absolutely certain that they are right, and frustrated by those that don't see it, and I include myself in this. And it was because I was so overwhelmed by the unscalable size of it all, and the ferocity with which many normally calm people reacted, that I started to notice a funny thing. If I considered what was being said, we all actually agreed on a lot of what we were arguing about. So why the hell were we arguing? I realised it was the values we each held that was driving the direction of each argument. All aimed at the same end result, yes, but often coming from opposite ends of the spectrum. Values were different for different people, and different between genders too, and that was when I looked for the underlying commonality, and it wasn't actually that hard to find. Shame was at the root of each and every problem associated to sex. And adding to this sense of shame was misinformation, a lack of real up-to-date valid knowledge, many assumed judgments, many projected assumptions, and quite a lot of coffee table magazine-style myths that people were belligerently clinging to in the absence of any kind of real knowledge source. And I don't mean Dr. Phil, Oprah, or thinly scripted sex documentaries. I recently watched The Masters of Sex, a documentary about Masters and Johnson's work in the 50s, and watching it I realised that to a large extent nothing has changed since civilization first started to become vaguely civilized about 2,000 years ago. Sure, thanks to M and J we now know about the clitoris and that women can have orgasms. But in our sense of sexual shame, very little has changed since Roman times. And why? Surely we are more advanced as a species today than 60 years ago or even 2,000 years ago. Surely we're more educated. Well, actually it seems that in many ways we aren't. In family, in community, in society, we remain full of shame around sexuality. Because for all our physical education about sex and its technicals, it has not helped us really understand its darker nature one bit, nor how to deal with it when it unexpectedly pops into our lives in some way. So terrified, we shut it out or try to, and worse, we further demonise it. And the media loves to jump on demons and glorify them. So too the rough end of the feminist movement, waving it around as a whipping stick against males. Today's hardcore porn sure looks like something demonic to most people, and I can understand why. I've certainly given up trying to explain how maybe it's just a predictable expression of the suppression and misinformation our society is experiencing. Whatever it is, the mysteriously unfathomable and uncontrollable dark side of sexuality appears to be the problem, and it's breaking out like suppressed steam bursting from a broken pipe. The dark side of sex runs riot in media and on the internet. Social media is a potential sexual disaster zone. Our cities see rape and domestic violence constantly. Our prisons hold many sex traffickers and sex offenders. Drinks get spiked in nightclubs. Booze leads to trashy car park sex, or that yes means no and no means yes. Yet still no one really seems able to define exactly what the differences are, or how it applies when alcohol or drugs are involved. Then 50 Shades of Grey, the movie, pops up and glorifies the ridiculous side of broken and naive people getting kink all very wrong. There's a smorgasbord of sexual disaster waiting for us out there if we want to risk it. And the older we get, the more we know the risks of sex, and the more we avoid it because it just isn't worth it. The more civilised we get, the more we fear and judge it, and the less we seem to understand its place in our world. The further away from actually experiencing sex that we get, paradoxically, the more obsessed with it we seem to become. until the media portrayal of it will make us think the impending demise of human civilization itself is being caused by the porn industry and the sex that we're not getting. And we buy into this very easily because it sounds right to our sense of shame and our ignorance of it, where negative media has been our one source of education outside of TV documentaries, personal experiences of shame, and of course local gossip. And then there's plenty of support and information in our lives to prove it too. The dark side of sex can destroy relationships, jobs, lives, through infidelity or porn addiction, or anything judged not normal. It can come back years later to haunt us through sexting and gossip mongering, or just that night that you really wish you hadn't done that thing. It can bring us incurable diseases or hellish experiences, emotional crises, swollen parts, confused communication, and broken hearts. Sex can destroy our lives just with a loosely mentioned label that doesn't even have to be true, like slut or rapist. The dark side of sex is not to be taken lightly, and we all know this all too painfully well. Sex will always be beyond our control, but maybe that is its gift. Everyone has their moment of sexual shame, and often we have many. There's always the one that stopped us trying to just get some ever again, and we pray to God no one will ever find out about how it really went. Then there's the weird thing, the one that makes you feel, strangely excited, but didn't ever know quite how to ask to try it with your partners. And that's also the one you secretly now fear your kids might become interested in. Like, isn't it written into our DNA or something? Sex starts off fun when we're young, but pretty soon it changes on us when we realise we don't control it at all and we get hurt. Then sex gets scary, sex gets dangerous. It is powerful. It's too powerful for us to handle because it lays our souls bare despite what we try to hide about ourselves. Of course it's powerful. In just a few minutes you can accidentally create an entire new human being with the stuff. Dark sex challenges our sense of self. Dark sex is the animal we keep locked in the basement but can't seem to kill. We daren't let it out, except secretly maybe, or when we're really drunk, because that seems to be the only way to explain our connection to the beast. It's a kind of agreed code of okayness to say, I was so drunk. It's rubbish, of course. Most of the time we know full well what we're doing. But worst of all, and the real bummer that makes us want to kill it, is that the dark side of sex threatens our children. And avoidance doesn't work either. Given the above, what I just said, for most normal adult people in a healthy relationship, and one that probably doesn't have all that much sex going on in it anymore, it's easier to try to stamp sex out altogether than try to deal with it. It's a kind of give it up for the kids' sake approach. And if you found a good partner, why ruin the security by trying to have a good sex life now? Especially getting into the darker side of yourself through it. Why bother? Well, unfortunately, as we all know, avoidance rarely works. Quite the opposite, which might explain just how nuts it is getting out there. If it is actually any different to how it's always been. In relationships, we replace sex with security, enough so that it becomes almost worth it. And besides, once in a while you can go out and get drunk with the girls and see a strip show, blame it on the booze, or the guy falls into a strip club, blames it on the other guys who they blame it on the booze. More avoidance and denial. And though this works to let off some of the steam at a personal level, it seems like enough, but is it? What kind of life is this we are living in avoidance of our dark side? What are we giving up? And what are we collectively causing in our society by all of us avoiding it? Is the beast expressing itself out there because we've given up on it in our own homes? Given up on it in all ways except for our negative obsession with it in movies, newspapers, gossip and trash magazines. And this is the 21st century civilized world. Welcome to the era of the crusaders of sexual shame. And one day I hope we can look back on this time in our history and laugh at it. Shame resilience, owning our dark side, talking about it and why we must. We are civilized creatures, but at the price of becoming terrified by our own dark sexuality and desperately trying to kill it off, stamp it out, lock it up or burn it at the stake. most especially when we see it going dark side in others. And then we love to demonise it and sacrifice a few witches. Nowadays we call them sluts. I believe most of the problems we see regarding sex will actually dissolve the day the human race is finally able to talk and understand their deeper, darker sexuality without shame, and it can be done as individuals owning our own sexuality without concern about what our partner or any other person might think, and that is shame resilience. Becoming able to talk about it in front of the kids, not as a lesson to them directly, but as proof that we are at ease with it and that there is nothing to fear or be ashamed of in their talking about it too, that will teach them all they need to know in order to own their own sense of sexuality when the time comes, and not feel a sense of shame at their sexuality, or have to learn about it from other kids or on the internet, or worse, when their beast breaks loose, which it will. By embracing our dark sexuality, we will actually defeat our sense of shame. And I don't believe everyone will just up and start at it like sex-mad monkeys, nor turn into hardcore porn-driven rapists. Actually, the opposite is more likely. We probably won't hunger for it all so much anymore, certainly not in the way it's currently being repressed and expressed. I firmly believe instead we will become to realise sexuality is directly linked to spirituality, and that it is a good thing. Even the dark side of our sexuality has its place when understood, given room to breathe, and gently directed towards more enlightening purposes. And it may even hold our capacity to choose how we evolve as human beings. The new sexual revolution. Sex really should be the next revolution, but not in the way the 60s tried it with free love and disastrous consequences. Rather as a way to rid ourselves once and for all of the power of shame. And that starts by creating individual resilience to shame, looking to heal our own shame, not focusing on what we perceive as other people's issues with sex, or how our judgment of their perceived problems might adversely affect our kids. There is only one way out of this, and that way is to get to know yourself. You need to find out what is on the dark side of your sexuality. Learn it, own it, know it. Don't keep it locked down in the basement thinking no one knows about it, or that ignoring it will make it go away, or that you don't have one. It always pops up like a steam-blown frogger somewhere else in our lives. What do you think drives the crusader, other than their own sense of what is unexpressed? And don't think that protecting the kids from sex will work at all. In fact, it needs to go the other way. You need to lead by example. Befriend the dark side of yourself. Befriend your inner beast, and they will know it's okay to share theirs with you when it arises. But if you judge it, fight it, declare war on it and start crusades and campaigns against the dark side of sex, then you can be sure your kids will seek out the sex as the forbidden fruit, or simply tell you nothing of their sexual journey because they will feel too ashamed. And by the way, before you think it, I'm not an advocate for liberal sex at all. I think sex is actually the last thing that should be happening in this new sexual revolution. Go figure. But rather, it's about education, real education, not what is currently being demonised by sexless obsessives in a drive not unlike the Spanish Inquisition, using Save the Kids or Save the Women as the banner with which to demonise and blame sexual expression, the dark or the light. Being a supporter of the crusade against the dark side of sex will take us all back hundreds of years to medieval ignorance and retarded reactions. The dark side of sex is something that has a place in all our lives, if it can only be understood better, so that it can find its rightful place, because like it or not, you will never get rid of it, so better the devil you know. Don't be a part of the problem. Don't create more shame in those who have the beast raging within them, because you might find shame is what brought it up in the first place, and you may find the monster you think you are fighting is actually just a reflection of the one living in your basement, and God forbid, in your kids. Become enlightened to the darkness. That is the only way, and that will be the new revolution if it ever comes. If you have to declare war on something, declare war on your own sense of shame and on your judgment of others. Because I can assure you, if you're a supporter of the crusade against any form of sexuality, you are ignorant as to what will solve the issue you think you see, where it is, and just what is causing it. Why not do the evolution of our species a favour? Come out of the dark ages, get a proper sex education, and the one that involves looking at your dark side.